I am Julian, 34 years old. 5 months ago, I made a decision that destroyed my family to save my future. My older brother, Derek, thought he could treat me like his personal doormat, just like he had for 3 decades. He thought no was just a suggestion. But when he sent his children to my doorstep, he didn't realize that the man living in my old house wasn't me, and he definitely didn't realize that I was finally done playing the role of the sacrificial lamb. It was 5 a.m. on a Tuesday. The Atlanta air was thick and humid, the kind of heat that makes it hard to breathe even before the sun comes up. I was standing in my walk-in closet, staring at my open-to-me suitcase. My flight to London was scheduled to depart from Hartsfield-Jackson at 1 p.m. This wasn't a vacation. It was the culmination of 8 months of grueling work. I was leading the due diligence team on a $5 million merger, the kind of professional milestone that would cement my reputation in high finance. My entire career hung on this weekend. The silence of my penthouse was shattered by the aggressive, rhythmic buzzing of my phone on the kitchen island. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. Only one person had the audacity to call before sunrise without even the courtesy of a text message first. Derek. I let it ring 3 times, debating whether to ignore it. My risk assessment brain, the same part of me that analyzed market volatility and corporate liabilities for a living, kicked into gear. If I ignored him, he would just keep calling, or worse, he would show up at my office or my penthouse. I swiped answer and put the phone on speaker while I folded a silk dress shirt. Julian, you're awake. Good. Derek didn't say hello. He never did. Listen, Chloe and I finally booked that Napa trip for our anniversary. The flight leaves at noon, so I'm going to need you to take the kids for the weekend. We'll drop them off around 4 p.m. Make sure you stock up on those organic snacks Mia likes. She's going through a phase where she refuses to eat anything with red dye 40. I stopped folding. The sheer entitlement in his voice wasn't new, but it still had the power to stun me. He wasn't asking. He was informing me. This was the Derek method. He created a crisis or a plan and then assigned roles to everyone else, assuming we would all fall in line to support the main character of the family. Derek, I said, my voice calm and flat. I cannot watch the kids. I am leaving for London in a few hours for work. I won't even be in the country. He laughed. A dismissive, short sound that grated on my nerves. Stop lying, Julian. Mom told me you finished that big project last week. You're just trying to get out of it because you hate Chloe. Look, I don't have time for your little grudges. These tickets are non-refundable and this trip cost me $3,000. I'm not losing that money just because you want to be difficult. I tightened my grip on the edge of the suitcase. $3,000. He had $3,000 for a wine tasting trip, but last month he had called me begging for $500 to fix the transmission on his SUV because he was short on cash. I'm not lying, Derek, I said. And even if I was in Atlanta, the answer would still be no. I am not your nanny. You didn't ask me in advance. You can't just dump 3 children on me with 0 notice. We didn't ask in advance because we wanted to surprise each other, he said, as if that made perfect sense. Look, it's just 3 days. You have that big house all to yourself. It's pathetic, really. All those empty bedrooms and no family to fill them. The kids will bring some life into that mausoleum. Just do this for me. We're family. Family helps family. That word, family. It was the weapon they always used to bludgeon me into submission. Growing up, I was always the one expected to sacrifice. When Derek wanted to go to an elite basketball camp, my parents drained my college fund to pay for it because he had potential. When he needed a car, they gave him theirs and told me to take the bus. Now, as adults, I was the one with the 6-figure salary and the investment portfolio, while Derek was bouncing between sales jobs he felt were beneath him. Yet, somehow, I was still the one who owed him. I took a deep breath. Derek, listen to me very carefully. I am not at that house. I am going to the airport. Do not bring the kids there. There is no one home to let them in. He sighed, loud and exaggerated. You are so dramatic. Fine. Play your games. I'll just tell the kids to wait on the porch until you stop pouting and open the door. We're sending them in an Uber because we're running late for our flight. They'll be there at 4 p.m. Don't make them wait outside too long, Julian. It's supposed to rain. He hung up. I stared at the phone, feeling the familiar rise of blood pressure that only my family could trigger. He thought I was bluffing. He thought I was sitting in my 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs, holding a grudge. He had no idea that I had sold that house 3 months ago. I hadn't told anyone. Not my parents, Arthur and Martha, and certainly not Derek. I looked at the clock. 5:15 a.m. I had a choice. I could call him back, scream until he listened, and save him from his own stupidity. Or I could let him touch the stove he insisted on touching. I chose the middle ground, the legal ground. I opened the family group chat, the one my mother had titled, William's Family Unity. I typed a message clearly and precisely. Derek, I am writing this so there is a record. I am currently at the airport flying to London for work. I do not live at the Maple Street address anymore. Do not send the children there. I am not available to watch them. If you abandon them at that location, you are solely responsible for whatever happens. This is my final notice. Almost immediately, the bubbles appeared. My mother was the first to respond. Julian, stop this nonsense. Your brother needs this break. Chloe has been so stressed lately. Just cancel your little trip or whatever you are doing. Family comes first. Then my father, Arthur. You are being incredibly selfish. We raised you better than this. Help your brother. Do not be spiteful just because you are jealous of his family life. Jealous. That was their favorite narrative. That I, the career man with the overflowing passport and the heavy 401k, was secretly dying of jealousy over Derek's life. Derek, who was 37 years old and still asked our parents to pay his cell phone bill. Derek, who was married to Chloe, a woman who once told me that my job was cute, but ultimately meaningless because I didn't have a wife to validate me. I read their messages and felt a cold resolve settle in my chest. They didn't believe me. They truly believed I was lying about being out of town just to spite them. They thought if they bullied me enough, I would magically materialize at the old house and open the door. I did not reply. I took a screenshot of the chat, timestamped it, and saved it to my cloud drive. Then I finished packing. At 10 a.m., my car service arrived. As I rode in the back of the black SUV, watching the Atlanta skyline drift by, I checked the chat one last time. Derek had posted a photo. It was him and Chloe at the airport, holding glasses of champagne in the Delta Sky Club. The caption read, Anniversary mode activated. Napa, here we come. Thanks to Uncle Julian for holding down the fort with the kiddos. He was establishing his public narrative. He was making it look like I had agreed so that if anything went wrong, he could say I flaked. He was setting me up to be the villain. I turned off my notifications. I arrived at the international terminal, breezed through security, and settled into the lounge. I ordered a glass of scotch and opened my laptop to review the merger files. At 12:03 p.m., my flight began boarding. I walked down the jet bridge, my phone in my hand. I had one moment of hesitation. Those were my niece and nephews. They were innocent. If Derek actually went through with this, they would be terrified. But I could not save them from their parents forever. If I caved now, if I called the police myself or rushed back to intercept them, I would be proving Derek right. I would be proving that his lack of planning was my emergency. I would be proving that no matter what I said, my no actually meant yes. I stepped onto the plane and found my seat in the business class cabin. The flight attendant offered me a hot towel. Can I get you anything to drink before we take off? She asked. Sparkling water, please, I said. I pulled out my phone one last time. No missed calls from Derek. He was probably already in the air, flying west while I flew east. He was confident. He was relaxed. I switched my phone to airplane mode. The signal bars vanished. The connection was severed. At 4 p.m. Atlanta time, I would be somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, reading a report on market volatility. And at 4 p.m. Atlanta time, an Uber driver would be pulling up to 452 Maple Street. Derek thought he was sending his kids to their pushover uncle. He didn't know he was sending them to Colonel Samuel Johnson. I had met the colonel during the closing of the house sale. He was a man who ironed his jeans, a man who looked you in the eye and crushed your hand when he shook it. He had moved to Atlanta to be closer to the VA hospital, and he valued two things above all else: order and discipline. He had told me specifically, "I bought this place because it has a fence and I don't like uninvited guests." I closed my eyes and leaned back as the plane taxied down the runway. There was no turning back now. The wheels lifted off the tarmac. I was gone, and Derek was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. While I was settling into my lie-flat seat over the Atlantic, enjoying the kind of peace that only comes from knowing you have done everything right, my brother Derek was on the ground in Atlanta executing a plan so flawed it bordered on delusional. It was 4 p.m., the exact time he had threatened to drop off his children. According to the police report and the Uber driver's statement I later read, Derek and Chloe were running late. Of course they were. They were always running late because they lived their lives assuming the world would wait for them. They stood on the curb of their rented townhouse in Buckhead, surrounded by luggage that looked expensive, but was likely bought on credit. Chloe was wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and oversized sunglasses, looking every bit the part of a woman heading to Napa for a wine tasting she felt she deserved. The three children, Ethan, Lily, and Mia, stood next to them, clutching their backpacks. They looked small and confused. They knew something was wrong. Children always know. They had heard the arguments, the frantic phone calls, the way their father's voice rose in pitch when he was lying. Derek checked his watch and cursed. The Uber he had ordered for himself and Chloe to go to the airport was 5 minutes away, but the Uber he had ordered for the kids had just pulled up. It was a dark gray sedan driven by a college student named Tarek, who probably thought he was just picking up a standard fare. Derek opened the back door of the sedan and started shoving the kids inside. "Get in," he snapped. "Ethan, you sit in the middle. Make sure Mia is buckled." Chloe stood by, checking her makeup in her compact mirror, completely disengaged from the fact that she was sending her children across town to a house where she had been told, exactly and explicitly, no one would be. "I still don't understand why Julian has to be so difficult," Chloe complained, snapping the compact shut. "He knows we've been planning this for months. He makes everything about himself. It's just 3 days. You'd think we asked him to donate a kidney." "He'll get over it," Derek said, slamming the car door shut once Mia was inside. "He always does. Julian likes to play the victim. He wants us to beg. But once the kids are there, he'll cave. He's not going to leave his own flesh and blood on the porch." He leaned into the open window to talk to the driver. "Listen, man. The destination is 452 Maple Street. It's about 40 minutes out with traffic. My brother is waiting for them. Just drop them in the driveway. He'll come out to get them. Here's a 20 for your trouble." He tossed a crumpled $20 bill onto the passenger seat. Tarek looked hesitant. He looked at the three kids in the back seat, then back at Derek. "You aren't coming with them, sir?" "No," Derek said, checking his phone again. "We have a flight to catch. Their uncle is expecting them. Just drive." Tarek nodded slowly, not paid enough to argue with a man in a linen suit who looked like he was about to explode. He rolled up the window and pulled away from the curb. Inside the car, the atmosphere was heavy. Ethan, the oldest at 9 years old, stared out the window. He was a smart kid, too smart for his own good sometimes. He remembered the last time they went to Uncle Julian's house. He remembered the yelling. He remembered his dad breaking the wall in the study. He had a knot in his stomach that felt like a stone. "Are we going to see Uncle Julian?" little Mia asked, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Yes," Ethan said quietly, but he didn't sound sure. As the car navigated the snarled traffic of I-85, the sky above Atlanta began to bruise. It was that time of year when the heat and humidity collided to form violent afternoon thunderstorms. The clouds turned a menacing shade of charcoal gray, and the wind began to whip the trees lining the highway. By the time the Uber turned onto Maple Street, the first drops of rain were hitting the windshield, fat and heavy. Tarek slowed down, squinting at the house numbers. The neighborhood was quiet. It was a transitional area, the kind where older bungalows were being bought up and renovated by young professionals. For 52, Maple Street looked different than the kids remembered. When I lived there, the lawn was soft and green, bordered by hydrangeas. I had a wreath on the door and a welcome mat that said, "Come in and cozy up." Now the house looked austere. The grass was cut military short. The hydrangeas were gone, replaced by severe, thorny hedges that lined the walkway like a security perimeter. The front windows were covered by heavy blackout blinds. There was no wreath. There was no welcome mat. There was just a sign on the gate that read, "No trespassing." Tarek pulled into the driveway. "This is it, kids," he said. He unlocked the doors. Ethan looked at the house. It was dark, completely, neatly dark. There were no lights on the porch, no warm glow from the living room window. "Is Uncle Julian home?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. "He must be," Ethan said, trying to be the big brother. "Dad said he was." They climbed out of the car, dragging their little rolling suitcases behind them. The rain was falling harder now, a steady drumbeat against the pavement. Tarek popped the trunk and set their heavier bags on the concrete. "You guys okay?" he asked, looking at the dark house. "Yeah," Ethan said. "We're fine." Tarek hesitated for a second, but he had another ride queued up, and the man in the linen suit had been so confident. He got back in his car and drove away, leaving 3 children standing on the sidewalk as the sky opened up. The storm broke with a crack of thunder that shook the ground. "Run to the porch," Ethan yelled, grabbing Mia's hand. They sprinted up the driveway, dragging their luggage, the wheels clattering loudly on the concrete. They scrambled up the steps to the front porch, seeking shelter from the deluge. The overhang protected them from the worst of the rain, but the wind was blowing it sideways, soaking their clothes. Ethan stepped up to the door. It was painted a high-gloss black, not the cheerful red I had chosen. He reached out and rang the doorbell. They waited. Silence. He rang it again, longer this time. Nothing. "Maybe he's in the shower," Mia suggested, hugging her arms around herself. It was getting cold, the temperature dropping rapidly with the storm. Ethan pounded on the door with his fist. "Uncle Julian, it's us. Open up." Inside the house, Colonel Samuel Johnson was in his study at the back of the house, cleaning his service pistol. He was a man who appreciated silence. He had spent 30 years in the Marine Corps, serving tours in places most people only saw on the news. He had seen things that made him value security above all else. He lived alone. He liked it that way. When he heard the pounding, he didn't think visitors. He thought threat. He had bought this house specifically because the previous owner, a man named Julian, had installed a top-of-the-line security system. He checked the monitor on his desk. The camera feed showed 3 figures on his porch, but because of the heavy rain and the angle of the camera lens, which was obscured by water droplets, he couldn't make out details. He just saw shapes, and then he saw one of them reaching for something. Ethan was reaching for the door handle, trying to see if it was unlocked. The colonel stood up. He didn't grab the pistol. That was for life-or-death situations. He grabbed the aluminum baseball bat he kept by the door. He moved through the hallway with the silent grace of a predator. He didn't turn on the lights. He wanted the element of surprise. On the porch, the kids were crying. Mia was wailing at full volume, terrified by the thunder. Lily was shivering, her teeth chattering. Ethan was banging on the door with both fists, panic rising in his throat. "Dad said he would be here," he shouted over the wind. "He promised." Suddenly, the deadbolt clicked. It was a loud, mechanical sound that cut through the noise of the storm. The kids froze. The door swung inward. Ethan looked up, expecting to see his Uncle Julian, maybe in his pajamas, maybe angry. But instead, he saw a giant. Colonel Johnson filled the doorway. He was 6 feet 4 inches with shoulders that blocked out the dim light from the hallway. A jagged scar ran down the left side of his face from his temple to his jaw, a souvenir from Fallujah. He wore a tight black t-shirt and tactical cargo pants, and in his right hand, he held a silver baseball bat, gripped tight, ready to swing. "Who goes there?" the colonel roared, his voice like gravel in a mixer. The kids screamed. It was a primal, terrified sound that echoed down the street. Mia dropped to her knees, covering her head. Lily tried to hide behind Ethan. Ethan, to his credit, stood his ground, though his legs were shaking so hard he could barely stand. "Please," he squeaked. "Please don't hurt us." The colonel blinked. He lowered the bat. His eyes adjusted to the gloom of the porch. He looked down. He didn't see intruders. He didn't see a threat. He saw 3 soaking wet, terrified children. One of them was clutching a stuffed rabbit that was dripping water. He saw the suitcases. He saw the way the oldest boy was trying to shield his sisters. The colonel's face changed. The warrior mask dropped away and was replaced by something else. Confusion and then horror. "What in God's name?" he muttered. He stepped back and flipped the porch light on. The sudden illumination revealed the children in stark relief. They were shivering, blue-lipped, and looking at him like he was the boogeyman. "Who are you?" the colonel asked, his voice significantly softer, but still commanding. "I am Ethan," the boy stammered. "This is Lily and Mia. We are looking for our Uncle Julian." "Julian," the colonel repeated. "Julian Williams?" "Yes, sir," Ethan said. "He lives here. Our dad sent us." The colonel looked at the suitcases, then out at the empty street where the Uber had long since vanished. He looked at the storm raging around them. "Julian Williams does not live here, son," he said grimly. "I bought this house 3 months ago." The color drained from Ethan's face. But Dad said." "Your dad is wrong," the colonel said. He stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Get in here now before you catch pneumonia." The kids hesitated. They had been taught stranger danger. But the man had put the bat down, and the wind was howling like a banshee. "Move it, soldiers!" the colonel barked, not unkindly. "Inside! Double time!" They shuffled inside, dripping water all over the hardwood floors that Derek had once stained with wine. The colonel kicked the door shut and locked it. He looked at the 3 of them standing in his foyer, puddles forming around their feet. He was a man who hated disorder. He hated mess. But looking at these abandoned children, he felt a rage building in his gut that had nothing to do with wet floors. Someone had dropped 3 minors at a stranger's house in the middle of a storm and driven away. "Where are your parents?" the colonel asked. "They went to the airport," Ethan whispered. "They are going to Napa." "The airport," the colonel repeated. He looked at the clock on the wall. 4:15 p.m. He didn't ask for Julian's number. He didn't ask to call their parents. He knew exactly what this situation was. In the Corps, they called it a dereliction of duty. In the civilian world, it was a crime. He walked over to the landline on the wall. He picked up the receiver and dialed 3 numbers. 911. "Operator, this is Colonel Samuel Johnson at 452 Maple Street," he said, his eyes never leaving the shivering children. "I need police and child protective services at my location immediately. I have 3 abandoned minors on my premises. Their parents have fled the state." He hung up the phone and looked at Ethan. "Sit down, son," he said, pointing to the bench by the door. "The police are coming. You are safe now." But he knew they weren't safe, not really, because the real danger wasn't the storm outside. It was the parents who had left them in it, and Colonel Johnson was about to make sure those parents paid for every single raindrop on his floor. The Atlantic Ocean was a vast, indifferent expanse beneath me, a perfect mirror to the calm I felt inside. At 35,000 feet, sipping scotch in a lie-flat seat, I was disconnected from the chaos I had left behind in Atlanta. But on the ground, the storm I had predicted, the one Derek had arrogantly assumed he could weather, was making landfall with devastating precision. It was 4:30 p.m. in Atlanta. The sky had turned a bruised purple, unleashing a torrential downpour typical of Georgia summers. But the flashing blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement of Maple Street weren't from the storm. They were from 2 Atlanta Police Department cruisers and a Child Protective Services van parked haphazardly in front of my old house. Colonel Johnson stood on his porch, a towering figure even without the baseball bat he had set aside. His arms were crossed over his chest, his face set in a grim line as he spoke to the responding officers. Behind him, inside the dry warmth of the foyer, my niece and nephews sat on a wooden bench, wrapped in thick wool blankets the colonel had pulled from his emergency supplies. They were shivering, their eyes wide and red-rimmed, clutching mugs of hot cocoa he had hurriedly made. Officer Ramirez, rain dripping from the brim of her hat, took notes as the colonel spoke. "I found them at 16:15 hours, Johnson said, his voice clipping with military precision. "Banging on the door, soaking wet. No adults in sight. The boy, Ethan, said they were dropped off by an Uber, and they claimed their uncle lived here." "Julian Williams?" Ramirez asked. "Affirmative," Johnson nodded. "I bought this property from his entity 3 months ago. I have never met the family, but the paperwork is clear. He vacated the premises in May." Inside, a CPS caseworker named Mrs. Gable was kneeling in front of Ethan. "Honey," she asked gently, "did your daddy say your uncle was inside?" Ethan nodded, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. He said Uncle Julian was being difficult, but he was home. He said, just wait on the porch and he'd open the door. He said he had to catch a plane." "A plane?" Mrs. Gable exchanged a dark look with Officer Ramirez. "To Napa," Mia piped up, her voice small. "For their anniversary." Ramirez stepped out to her cruiser. "Dispatch, we have a confirmed abandonment. 3 minors. Parents are Derek and Chloe Williams. They are reportedly on a flight to Napa Valley, California. I need you to contact the airlines immediately. Get me a flight number and a landing time." It didn't take long. Derek, in his infinite need for validation, had posted his boarding pass on Facebook hours earlier. "Delta Flight 452 to San Francisco. They're in the air," dispatch crackled back. "Landing at SFO in 2 hours. Contact SFO police." Ramirez ordered, her jaw tightening. "Tell them to meet the welcoming committee at the gate." 3,000 miles away, the mood in the first-class cabin of Delta Flight 452 was celebratory. Derek reclined his seat, a gin and tonic in hand, scrolling through the in-flight entertainment. Chloe was flipping through a Vogue magazine, already mentally planning her outfits for the vineyard tours. "Do you think he let them in yet?" Chloe asked idly, not looking up. Derek chuckled. "Oh, definitely. He probably let them sit in the rain for 10 minutes just to prove a point. Julian loves to play the martyr, but he's soft. He's probably making the mac and cheese right now and composing a long, angry email to me. I'll delete it when we land." "Good," Chloe sighed. "I don't want his drama ruining my trip. I need this, Derek. The kids have been so exhausting lately." "Relax, babe," Derek said, patting her hand. "It's handled. We are untouchable." He turned on his phone as the pilot announced their descent. "Let's check in. Make the guys back home jealous." He opened Facebook and posted a selfie of them clinking glasses. "Napa bound. Peace out, ATL. #anniversary, #no kids, #living the life." As the plane taxied to the gate, Derek stood up, stretching his back. He grabbed his carry-on, feeling like the king of the world. He had outsmarted his brother, dumped his responsibilities, and was about to enjoy a 5-star vacation. They walked off the jet bridge and into the terminal. Derek was busy typing a text to his mother. "Landed safely. Tell Julian thanks again." That was when he noticed the crowd at the gate wasn't moving. There was a wall of blue uniforms blocking the exit. "Excuse me," Derek said, trying to push past a TSA agent. "We have a car waiting." "Derek Williams?" A deep voice boomed. Derek looked up. A sergeant from the San Francisco Police Department was staring directly at him. 2 other officers flanked him, hands resting near their belts. "Yeah," Derek said, his smile faltering. "Who's asking?" "And Chloe Williams?" the sergeant asked, looking at Chloe. "I'm Chloe," she said, confused. "Is this about the luggage?" "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the sergeant barked. "What?" Derek laughed. A nervous, high-pitched sound. Is this a joke? Did Todd set this up? Very funny, guys. Sir, this is not a prank. You are under arrest. The officer grabbed Derek's wrist, spinning him around and slamming him against the wall of the terminal. The cold steel of handcuffs clicked shut before Derek could even process the sensation. Ow, you're hurting me. Chloe shrieked as another officer cuffed her. What is going on? We didn't do anything. You are being detained on a warrant from Fulton County, Georgia, the sergeant announced, his voice carrying over the stunned silence of the other passengers. 3 counts of child abandonment in the 2nd degree. Reckless endangerment. Child abandonment? Derek shouted, struggling against the cuffs. Are you crazy? My kids are with my brother. He's babysitting them. Your brother doesn't live there, sir, the sergeant said coldly. You dropped your children off at the home of a Colonel Samuel Johnson. He called 911 when he found them shivering on his porch in a thunderstorm. The color drained from Derek's face. No, that's a lie. He's lying. Julian is playing games. He's inside. I know he is. The security footage says otherwise, the sergeant said. And right now, your children are in the custody of Child Protective Services because you fled the state. The crowd of passengers, initially annoyed by the delay, was now filming. Dozens of phones were raised, capturing Derek's face as it crumpled from arrogance to sheer panic. Julian! Derek screamed at the ceiling, as if I could hear him from London. You did this. You set me up. Officers, call my brother. He's watching them. It's a mistake. The only mistake, the officer said, pushing Derek forward, was thinking you could dump your kids like trash and go on vacation. As they were marched through the terminal in handcuffs, Chloe sobbing loudly about her reputation, and Derek yelling incoherent threats about lawsuits. The video was already being uploaded to TikTok. The caption read, Parents arrested at SFO after ditching kids for wine trip. It had been less than 6 hours since I ignored his call, and Derek was right about one thing. He was definitely going to learn a lesson this weekend. Just not the one he expected. The moment the wheels of the British Airways jet touched the tarmac at Heathrow Airport, I felt a vibration in my handbag that did not stop. It was a relentless buzzing, a digital swarm of panic that signaled my peaceful disconnection was over. I had spent 8 hours in the air, suspended in the luxury of silence, believing that I had successfully drawn a boundary that my brother would be forced to respect. I believed he would see my message, see the dark house, and turn around. I underestimated his stupidity. I waited until the plane taxied to the gate before pulling my phone out. The screen lit up with a kaleidoscope of notifications. 37 missed calls from my mother, Martha. 22 from my father, Arthur. 14 from Derek. And then, a string of text messages that escalated from confusion to rage to sheer, unadulterated panic. But the notification that made my blood run cold was not from my family. It was a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize with a generic area code for Atlanta Government Services. Mr. Williams, this is Detective Miller with the Atlanta Police Department Special Victims Unit. We have 3 minors in protective custody who were abandoned at a residence on Maple Street. Your name and number were found in their possession, listed as the emergency contact. We need you to contact us immediately regarding the location of the parents, Derek and Chloe Williams. Failure to respond could have legal implications. I sat in my seat as the other passengers stood up to retrieve their overhead luggage. The $5 million merger, the meetings with the London partners, the career milestone I had worked toward for 8 months. All of it evaporated in that instant. I was a risk analyst. I knew how to weigh costs. And I knew that if I stayed in London while my niece and nephew were in the system and my brother was being arraigned, I would lose control of the narrative. My parents would spin this. Derek would lie. I needed to be in the room. I stood up and walked to the front of the plane, but instead of exiting toward customs, I stepped to the side and called my boss. I have a catastrophic family emergency involving the police, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I cannot attend the closing. Send Jonathan. I have to fly back to Atlanta immediately. My boss was furious, but he heard the steel in my tone. He knew I never flaked. He knew I never made excuses. If I was walking away from $5 million, it was because the building was burning down. I booked the next flight back. It cost me $6,000 for a last-minute seat. I didn't care. I spent the return flight not sleeping, but preparing. I called my personal attorney, David, calm, aggressive, and expensive, and told him to meet me at the Fulton County precinct. I organized my evidence. The screenshots, the emails, the deed transfer documents, proving I didn't own the house. When I landed in Atlanta 14 hours later, I was exhausted, jet-lagged, and running on pure fury. David met me at baggage claim. He was a shark in a charcoal suit, and he looked at me with a kind of professional sympathy reserved for clients whose families were liabilities. "They are holding Derek and Chloe at the precinct," David briefed me as we walked to his car. "They were arrested at SFO the moment they landed. They are being flown back now in custody, but your parents are already at the station. They are trying to get access to the grandchildren, but CPS is blocking them because the investigation is ongoing." We drove in silence to the station. The Atlanta humidity hit me like a wet towel when I stepped out of the car. The precinct was a drab brick building that smelled of stale coffee and misery. I smoothed my blazer, took a deep breath, and walked through the double doors. The waiting area was chaotic, and in the center of the chaos were Arthur and Martha Williams. My parents didn't look like concerned grandparents. They looked like offended royalty who had been asked to wait in line. My mother was wearing her Sunday church hat and clutching her pearls, pacing back and forth. My father was arguing with the desk sergeant, his voice booming with the entitlement of a man who had never been told no. When the heavy security door clicked open and I walked into the lobby, the noise stopped. My mother froze mid-step, her eyes locked onto me, and for a second, I expected relief. I expected her to run to me, to hug me, to thank me for coming back to help sort out this nightmare. Instead, her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. "There she is," my father shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "There is the reason for all of this. They didn't ask about the kids. They didn't ask about the children who had stood in a thunderstorm, terrified and abandoned. They charged at me. You did this," Martha screamed, rushing toward me. "You evil, selfish boy. You set him up. You knew they were coming, and you let this happen." I stood my ground, my hands clasped in front of me. "I told him not to come, Mother. I told him I didn't live there. I told him I was in London." "You lied," Arthur roared, lunging past my mother. "You lied to trick him. You sold the house without telling us. Who does that? Who sells their home and hides it from their own flesh and blood? You wanted him to fail. You wanted him to get arrested." He was close now, too close. I could smell the peppermint breath mints he always chewed to cover the smell of his cigars. He raised his hand. It was a reflex I remembered from childhood, a gesture of dominance meant to cow me into submission. He was going to slap me right there in the police station lobby. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I looked him dead in the eye, daring him to do it, but he never made contact. David stepped between us smoothly, catching my father's wrist in midair. It was a gentle motion, but firm enough to stop Arthur in his tracks. "Mr. Williams," David said, his voice low and dangerous, "I am Julian's attorney. You are currently in a police station. If you touch my client or even raise your voice at him again, I will have you arrested for assault and witness intimidation before you can blink. Do you understand me?" Arthur snatched his arm back, looking shocked. He looked at the officers behind the desk who were now watching us with keen interest. He adjusted his jacket, trying to regain his dignity, but he was shaking. "She ruined his life?" Martha sobbed, clinging to Arthur's arm. "Derek is in handcuffs because of him. He is cold-blooded. He has no heart. How could you do this to your brother, Julian? He just wanted a vacation. He worked so hard." "He worked so hard?" I repeated, the irony tasting bitter on my tongue. "He has been unemployed for 2 years, Mother. He lives off Chloe's credit cards and your pension. And he worked so hard that he couldn't be bothered to verify if his children had a safe place to stay before he flew across the country to drink wine. "Don't talk about him like that," Martha hissed. "He is a good father. A good father does not dump his children on a stranger's porch in a storm," I said, my voice rising just enough to carry. "A good father does not ignore 3 warnings. A good father does not get arrested at baggage claim because he was too busy taking selfies to answer the police." Detective Miller appeared at the doorway to the back offices. He was a tired-looking man with a notepad and a skeptical expression. "Mr. Williams?" he asked, looking at me. "Yes," I said, stepping around my parents. "We need a statement," the detective said, "and we need to clarify the custody situation. Your brother and his wife have just arrived. They are being processed now." I turned to follow him. Arthur grabbed my elbow. "Julian, listen to me. You have to fix this. You go in there and you tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you got the dates mixed up. Tell them you were supposed to be there, but your flight got delayed. If you take the blame, they will let Derek go. It will be a civil dispute, not a criminal one." I stared at him. The sheer audacity of the request took my breath away. "You want me to lie to the police?" I asked. "You want me to tell them that I agreed to watch the kids and then negligently abandon them? Do you know what that would do to me? I would be charged with child endangerment. I would lose my clearance. I would lose my job. I would lose everything I have built." Arthur gripped my arm tighter, his nails digging in. "Your job? Who cares about your job? Derek is your brother. He is a man. He has a family. He cannot have a record. You can bounce back. You owe him this." I looked at his hand on my arm. Then I looked at my mother, who was nodding eagerly, her eyes pleading with me to sacrifice myself on the altar of her golden child one last time. "I owe him nothing," I said, pulling my arm free with a violent jerk. "And I certainly do not owe you my future." I turned my back on them. I walked toward the secure doors, leaving them standing in the lobby, impotent and furious. Detective Miller swiped his badge and held the door open for me and David. As we walked down the hallway, the sounds of the station buzzed around me. Phones ringing, radios crackling, the murmur of interrogations. We stopped in front of Observation Room B. Through the one-way glass, I saw them. Derek was sitting at a metal table, still wearing his linen vacation suit, though it was now wrinkled and stained with sweat. His hands were cuffed to the table. He looked small. He looked terrified, but mostly he looked angry. He was muttering to himself, shaking his head. Chloe was in the corner, huddled in a chair, mascara running down her face in black streaks. She wasn't looking at Derek. She was looking at the wall, rocking back and forth. They looked like exactly what they were. 2 people who had spent their lives believing the rules didn't apply to them, finally crashing into a wall they couldn't charm or bully their way through. I stood there watching them. The storm was over, but the wreckage was everywhere. I was ready. Detective Miller looked at me. "They are claiming you agreed to take the children verbally," he said, his eyes searching mine. "They say you are lying about the text messages to cover your own negligence. They are sticking to that story." I reached into my bag and pulled out my tablet. I had already prepared the battlefield. "I have the chat logs, Detective," I said, unlocking the screen. "I have the timestamps. I have the metadata showing I was in the international terminal when he called. And I have the deed of sale for the house on Maple Street, dated 90 days ago. I never agreed. I explicitly refused, and he sent them anyway." The detective nodded, taking the tablet. "That is what I needed to hear. Are you ready to go in?" I straightened my blazer. I thought about the little boy I had been, the boy who was always told to wait, to give, to understand. I thought about Ethan, Lily, and Mia sitting in a stranger's house, soaking wet because their father gambled their safety on my compliance. "I am ready," I said. David opened the door, and I stepped into the interrogation room. Derek's head snapped up. When he saw me, his eyes lit up with a mix of relief and fury. "Julian!" he shouted, straining against the cuffs. Tell them, This is a misunderstanding. Tell them you forgot. I stood at the end of the table, looking down at him. I didn't sit. Hello, Derek, I said, my voice cool and detached. I hope the flight was smooth. I hear the wine in Napa is to die for, but I suppose you won't be tasting any of it where you are going. Chloe stared at the tablet, her mouth agape. Derek squeezed his eyes shut, his head dropping to his chest in defeat. He knew, I said, addressing the detective but looking directly at Chloe. He knew I wasn't there. He knew it was going to rain, and he explicitly instructed you to leave them on the porch. That is premeditation. That is reckless endangerment. Chloe turned slowly to look at her husband. Her face wasn't sad anymore. It was twisted in fury. You knew, she whispered. You knew he wasn't there. Derek looked up, his eyes pleading. Babe, he is always lying. I thought he was bluffing. I thought he was just trying to ruin our trip. You idiot! Chloe screamed, lunging at him, only to be jerked back by the handcuffs chained to the table. You moron! You told me he confirmed it. You showed me a text message. I faked it, Derek mumbled. I changed the contact name on my burner phone and texted myself so you would stop worrying. I just wanted us to have a nice weekend. Chloe let out a guttural scream of frustration, burying her face in her hands. But then, as the reality of her situation settled in, she lifted her head and her eyes locked onto me again. The fear was gone, replaced by a sudden, sharp malice. The cornered animal was biting back. This is your fault, she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. You set him up. You knew he would do this. You could have called us back. You could have called the police before we got on the plane. But you waited. You waited until we were in the air. I didn't flinch. I warned him. I told him the consequences. You wanted this. Chloe spat. You enjoyed this. You are jealous, Julian. You have always been jealous. You sit in your fancy penthouse with your expensive clothes and your lonely life, and you hate us because we have what you can never buy. You have a family. You have love, and you cannot stand it. So you orchestrated this whole thing to break us apart. I stared at her, amazed by the delusion. Jealous, I repeated calmly. You think I am jealous of a marriage where the husband lies to the wife to get her on a plane? You think I am jealous of a mother who dumps her kids in an Uber so she can go wine tasting? Yes, she screamed. You are a bitter, sad man, and you are punishing my children because you are miserable. That was it. The accusation that I was hurting the children. That was the line. I walked over to the table, leaning down until my face was level with hers. I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the sour scent of fear and sweat. You want to talk about hurting children, Chloe? Let's talk about that. I tapped my tablet again, bringing up a new document. It was a spreadsheet, colorful and detailed, created by my firm's forensic accounting software. Detective Miller, I said, not looking away from Chloe. Since Mrs. Williams is claiming to be the mother of the year, I think you should see this. This is a financial breakdown of the Williams household for the last 12 months. As a risk analyst, I tend to notice irregularities, especially when my brother asks to borrow money every other week. I slid the tablet toward the detective but made sure Chloe could see the screen. Chloe, you claim you cannot afford health insurance for the kids, I said, my voice cold. You told our parents last month that Ethan missed his dental checkup because money was tight. You told me Lily couldn't go to gymnastics because it was too expensive. I pointed to a column of red figures. Yet, here we have your credit card statements. $2,100 a month at Serenity Spa in Buckhead. $400 a month at a nail salon. $600 last month alone at a boutique for designer handbags. Chloe's face went white. Derek looked up, his eyes bulging. $2,000? Derek sputtered. You told me those were groceries. And Derek, I continued, ignoring him, you are no better. $3,000 on online sports betting in the last quarter alone. Meanwhile, your children are on the free lunch program at school because you claim poverty. I turned back to the detective. They are not poor, detective. They are negligent. They choose luxury for themselves and poverty for their children. They sent those kids to my house not because they were desperate, but because they didn't want to pay for a babysitter. They wanted that money for Napa. The room felt incredibly small. The air was thick with the ugly truth of their lives laid bare. Chloe looked like she was going to be sick. The narrative of the struggling young family had been shredded. They were just selfish people who had finally been caught. Detective Miller picked up the tablet, scrolling through the numbers, his expression darkening with every swipe. "This goes to character," he muttered. "And motive." He looked at the two of them with undisguised disgust. "Derek and Chloe Williams, you are hereby remanded into custody. Given the flight risk you demonstrated by attempting to leave the state and the financial irregularities shown here, I am recommending no bail until the arraignment hearing on Monday." "No bail?" Derek shouted, struggling against his cuffs again. "Monday? That is 3 days away. I cannot stay in jail for 3 days. I have things to do." "You should have thought of that before you got in the Uber," Detective Miller said, signaling for the uniformed officers outside. "Take them to processing. Separate cells." Chloe started screaming again, begging, pleading, looking at me with wild eyes. "Julian, help us. Please take the kids. Just take the kids and we will fix this. Don't let them take my babies." I watched as the officers hauled them to their feet. I watched as they were marched out of the room. Derek weeping openly now, Chloe cursing my name. When the door closed, the silence that rushed back into the room was heavy. Detective Miller looked at me, handing back my tablet. "That was brutal, Mr. Williams, but necessary. Where are the children?" I asked, my voice finally trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. "They are being transported to a temporary foster care facility," the detective said gently. "Since the parents are in custody and there is no other approved guardian immediately available, it is procedure. Foster care." The words hit me harder than any of the insults Chloe had thrown. Ethan, Lily, and Mia sleeping in a strange place with strangers because their parents were monsters and their uncle had to prove a point. "Can I take them?" I asked. The detective shook his head. "Not tonight. You are a witness in a criminal investigation against their parents. Conflict of interest until the judge clears it. And honestly, Mr. Williams, you might want to prepare yourself. Given what you just showed me about their finances and the abandonment charge, this is not going to be a short stay for those kids." I nodded, feeling a tear slide down my cheek. I had won. I had proven I was right. I had exposed them. But as I walked out of the police station into the humid Atlanta night alone, I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like the survivor of a car crash, standing in the wreckage of my family, knowing that the only way to save myself was to let them burn. The Fulton County Family Court building smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and the distinct metallic tang of desperation. It was a place where the facade of happy families was stripped away, leaving only the ugly, raw nerves of dysfunction exposed for a judge to adjudicate. I sat in the second row of the gallery, my hands folded neatly in my lap, wearing a charcoal power suit that cost more than Derek's entire wardrobe. Next to me, David tapped his pen against his legal pad, a rhythmic sound that matched the ticking of the clock on the wall. At the defendant's table, Derek and Chloe sat slumped in their chairs. They were wearing standard-issue County Orange jumpsuits. The transformation was jarring. Without his linen suit and his arrogance, Derek looked small, deflated, like a balloon that had lost its air. Chloe's hair, usually blow-dried to perfection, was pulled back in a messy knot, and her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing the dark circles of a woman who had spent the last 3 nights in a holding cell, listening to the sounds of real criminals. They refused to look at me. They stared straight ahead at the seal of the state of Georgia, hanging above the judge's bench. Judge Beverly Thorne swept into the room. She was a formidable woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen every lie a parent could possibly tell. She didn't bang her gavel. She simply sat down, opened the file in front of her, and the room fell into a terrified silence. In the matter of the state versus Derek and Chloe Williams, Regarding the custody of minors Ethan, Lily, and Mia Williams, she said, her voice dry as parchment. We are here to determine temporary guardianship pending the outcome of the criminal charges against the parents. The attorney for Child Protective Services, a young woman who looked overworked and underpaid, stood up. Your Honor, the state requests that the children remain in foster care. The parents have demonstrated a profound lack of judgment amounting to criminal negligence. Furthermore, our investigation into the family's background has revealed a pattern of instability that makes them unfit guardians at this time. Derek shifted in his seat, his chains rattling. His public defender put a hand on his arm to silence him. Judge Thorne looked over her glasses. Elaborate on the instability. The CPS attorney nodded and picked up a document. It was the financial dossier I had provided to the police. Seeing it there in the hands of the state felt like watching a bomb I had built finally being detonated. Your Honor, Mr. Williams has been unemployed for 26 months, she began. Despite this, the family maintains a lifestyle that burns through approximately $12,000 a month. This lifestyle is funded entirely by credit card debt, predatory loans, and cash infusions from the paternal grandparents. She flipped a page. Mrs. Williams claims to be a stay-at-home mother, yet records show she spends an average of 30 hours a week outside the home at various beauty and wellness appointments, while the children are largely unsupervised or left with neighbors. The children are not enrolled in any extracurricular activities due to alleged lack of funds. Yet, Mrs. Williams spent $4,000 on a handbag last month. The children are behind on vaccinations and dental care. Ethan needs a root canal that has been put off for 6 months, while Mr. Williams purchased a season pass to a luxury golf range. The air in the courtroom grew thin. I watched Chloe's shoulders shake. She was crying again, but I felt nothing. This was just data. This was the math of their selfishness finally being balanced. The CPS attorney looked directly at Derek. Essentially, Your Honor, these children are accessories to their parents' lifestyle. They are fed and clothed minimally, while the parents live like royalty on borrowed dimes. The abandonment incident this weekend was not an anomaly. It was the inevitable result of two people who view their children as inconveniences. That was the spark. Derek slammed his hands on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He stood up, dragging his chair with him, his face twisted in a snarl of wounded pride. That is a lie, he shouted. I am a good father. I love my kids. Sit down, Mr. Williams. Judge Thorne barked. No, I will not sit down. Derek yelled, his voice cracking. You are listening to her. He pointed a shaking finger at me without turning around. You are listening to my vindictive brother. He gave you those numbers. He cooked the books. He is trying to steal my kids because he is jealous. I am their father. I have rights. You cannot take my children away because of one mistake. I am the man of the house. The bailiff took a step forward, his hand resting on his taser. Judge Thorne did not flinch. She looked at Derek with the kind of cold disdain usually reserved for insects. Mr. Williams, you are currently facing 3 felony counts of child abandonment, she said, her voice deadly calm. You were arrested at an airport 3,000 miles away from your children while a storm raged. You do not have rights right now. You have a very thin thread of liberty that I am about to snap. She banged her gavel once. A sharp, final sound. The court finds that Derek and Chloe Williams are currently unfit to care for these minors. Temporary custody is granted to the state. The parents are remanded to county jail without bail pending their arraignment on Tuesday. Chloe let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. Derek slumped back into his chair, defeated, his head in his hands. It was done. They had lost. But the play wasn't over. The second act was just beginning. From the front row of the gallery, my parents, Arthur and Martha Williams, stood up. They were dressed in their Sunday best. My father in a 3-piece navy suit, my mother in a cream-colored dress with a matching hat. They looked like the pillars of the community they pretended to be. They looked respectable. They looked safe. Your Honor, Arthur said. his deep baritone voice filling the room. He projected the aura of a patriarch stepping in to clean up a mess. Judge Thorne looked at them. "And who are you?" "I am Arthur Williams. This is my wife, Martha. We are the paternal grandparents." The judge's expression softened slightly. Courts always preferred family placement. It was less trauma for the kids, less cost for the state. "Mr. Williams," the judge said, "you understand the gravity of this situation?" "We do, Your Honor," Arthur said, stepping into the aisle. "We are devastated by our son's lapse in judgment. We do not excuse it. But these are our grandchildren. We have been part of their lives since they were born. We cannot let them go into the system with strangers. We are requesting emergency kinship guardianship." The CPS attorney looked through her files. "We have not had time to vet the grandparents, Your Honor. However, they do have a clean record. No criminal history." Arthur puffed out his chest slightly. "We are upstanding citizens, Your Honor. I am a retired deacon. My wife is a retired educator. We have the means and the time to care for the children. We want to take them home today. We want to provide the stability they have been lacking." Judge Thorne looked thoughtful. She tapped her pen against her lip. "Where do you reside, Mr. Williams?" "We live at 452 Maple Street," Arthur said loudly, making sure his voice carried to the back of the room where I sat. "It is a large colonial home in the historic district. For bedrooms, large fenced yard. It is the family home, Your Honor. The children know it well. They have their own rooms there. It is a safe environment, a place of love and tradition." He turned his head slightly, casting a glare in my direction. It was a look of triumph. He was playing the hero. He was saving the day. He was proving that despite my betrayal, the Williams family, the real Williams family, was strong. "We own the home outright," Arthur continued, lying with the ease of a man who had believed his own fiction for years. "It is an asset valued at nearly $800,000. We have the financial stability to provide for all 3 children immediately. We can take them right now." Beside him, Martha dabbed at her dry eyes with a handkerchief. "We just want our babies home," she whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "We just want to heal this family." The courtroom seemed to sway with the emotional weight of their performance. It was perfect. The grieving grandparents stepping in to save the innocent children from the wreckage caused by their foolish son and their cold-hearted son. Judge Thorne nodded slowly. She looked impressed. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams, the court appreciates your willingness to step forward. In cases like this, kinship placement is always our preference. If you have a stable home, adequate space, and the financial means to support 3 children, I see no reason to keep them in foster care for another night." Arthur smiled. It was a benevolent, fatherly smile. "Thank you, Your Honor. You will not regret this." The judge picked up her pen, ready to sign the order that would hand Ethan, Lily, and Mia over to the very people who had created the monster that was Derek. The people who had enabled his behavior, who had funded his negligence, who had tried to force me to commit perjury just 12 hours ago. "Wait, Your Honor," David said, standing up. The judge paused, pen hovering over the paper. She looked at David, annoyed. "Who are you, counselor?" "I am David Sterling, representing Julian Williams, the uncle of the children and a witness in this case." Arthur rolled his eyes. "Your Honor, my son. He has personal issues. He is trying to obstruct this process out of spite." Judge Thorne looked at me. I sat stone still, my face a mask of calm. "Mr. Williams, do you have an objection to the grandparents taking custody?" I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I walked to the railing that separated the gallery from the court floor. I looked at Arthur and Martha, who were staring at me with a mixture of hatred and fear. They knew I had the recording, but they thought I wouldn't use it here. They thought I wouldn't dare humiliate them in public. They were wrong. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and steady, "I do not object to the grandparents because of spite. I object because their petition is based on perjury." "Perjury?" Arthur sputtered, his face turning purple. "How dare you?" Mr. Williams claimed to own the residence at 452 Maple Street. I continued, ignoring him. He claimed it is a stable home. He claimed to have financial stability. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a leather binder. The truth, Your Honor, is that Arthur and Martha Williams do not own that house. They haven't owned it for 2 years. It was foreclosed on due to unpaid taxes and a second mortgage they took out to pay for Derek's gambling debts. The room went silent. Arthur looked like he had been punched in the gut. Martha grabbed his arm for support. The house was sold at auction, I said, and it was purchased by a private company to prevent my parents from being evicted. They are currently tenants. They pay 0 rent. They have no lease, and their tenure is entirely at the mercy of the landlord. And who is the landlord? Judge Thorne asked, her eyes narrowing. I opened the binder and pulled out the deed. I held it up. The landlord is Bluebird LLC, Your Honor, and I am the sole proprietor of Bluebird LLC. I looked at my parents. I owned the home, Your Honor. I paid their debts. I paid their taxes. I put a roof over their heads when they were bankrupt. And I did it anonymously so they could keep their dignity. I took a step closer to the railing. But last night, these 2 people came to my hotel room and tried to coerce me into lying to the police to save their son. They told me my career didn't matter. They told me to commit a felony. And when I refused, they threatened me. I turned back to the judge. So no, Your Honor, they do not have a stable home because, as of this moment, I am terminating their tenancy. They are being evicted. They have nowhere to take those children because, by tonight, they will have nowhere to go themselves. Arthur looked at me, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The arrogance was gone. The triumph was gone. There was only the terrifying realization that the safety net he had been jumping on for years had just vanished. Judge Thorne looked from me to Arthur, then back to me. She slowly set her pen down. Is this true, Mr. Williams? She asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. Do you live in a home owned by your son? Arthur couldn't speak. He just nodded, a jerky, spasmodic motion. The judge leaned back in her chair. Then your petition is denied, she said. She looked at the bailiff. Remove the defendants. And Mr. Sterling, please approach the bench with your client. We have a lot to discuss. I looked at my parents one last time, and then I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of the wolf who had finally blown the house down. I sat in the witness chair, the wood hard against my back, my hands resting calmly on the railing. The courtroom air was stagnant, recycled, and heavy with the scent of old paper and anxiety. From my vantage point, I had a clear view of the entire theater of my life. To my left, Judge Thorne waited, her pen hovering over the order that would finally stop the insanity. To my right, my parents sat shoulder to shoulder, radiating a fragile, desperate dignity. They looked at me, their eyes wide, silently screaming a mixture of commands and pleas. Be a good son. Be silent. Do not ruin this. My father's earlier confidence had evaporated, leaving behind a sheen of sweat on his forehead. He knew I had the recording from the hotel room. He knew I could prove witness tampering, but he was gambling that I wouldn't use it. He was betting on the one thing he had relied on for 34 years, my desire to be loved by them. He thought that, deep down, I was still the little boy waiting for a pat on the head. He was wrong. That little boy died the day he realized his college fund had been liquidated to pay for Derek's gambling debts. David stood at the podium. He adjusted his cufflinks, a shark smelling blood in the water. Mr. Williams, he began, his voice projecting to the back of the room. You heard your father's testimony regarding his fitness to serve as a guardian. He stated under oath that he owns the property at 452 Maple Street outright. He stated that he has the financial stability to provide for 3 children. Do you have any evidence that contradicts this statement? I leaned into the microphone. It made a small feedback whine before I spoke. Yes, I do. Arthur flinched. Martha grabbed his hand, her knuckles white. Please elaborate, David said, stepping back to give me the floor. I looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I do not oppose my parents because I doubt their love for their grandchildren. I believe they love Ethan, Lily, and Mia in their own way. But love does not pay for dental work. Gambling addiction? Judge Thorne asked, her eyebrows shooting up. Mr. Williams stated he is a retired deacon with a pension. Mr. Williams is a retired deacon, I acknowledged. But he is also a man who has systematically drained his entire net worth to cover the debts of his son, Derek. I opened the leather binder I had brought to the stand. The sound of the 3 metal rings snapping open echoed in the silent courtroom like a pistol cocking. 3 years ago, Derek accumulated $50,000 in sports betting debt with an illegal bookmaker, I said, pulling out a stack of bank statements. He was threatened. To save him, my father took out a second mortgage on the family home. He drained his 401k. He liquidated his life insurance policy. I held up the documents. The red ink on the pages was visible even from the bench. They paid the debt, I continued, but they couldn't pay the mortgage. The house fell into foreclosure 2 years ago. The bank seized it. They were 2 weeks away from being evicted by the sheriff. They were packing boxes. They were going to move into a motel. Arthur let out a strangled sound, a gasp that sounded like a dying engine. He tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't support him. He slumped back down, his face turning the color of ash. "This is irrelevant," he croaked, his voice shaking. "That is private family business. We still live there. We have a home. Sit down, Mr. Williams." Judge Thorne barked, her gavel hitting the wood with a crack. "Mr. Williams, continue. If the house was foreclosed on, why are they still residing there?" "Because of Bluebird LLC." I pulled out the next document. It was a deed of sale stamped with the official seal of Fulton County. "When the house went to auction," I said, "I knew my parents would not survive the humiliation of being homeless. Their reputation in the community is the only currency they have left. They could not bear the shame, so I intervened." I looked at my mother. She was staring at me, her mouth open, her eyes filled with a dawning horror. She was starting to put the pieces together. "I formed a holding company called Bluebird LLC, I explained. "I used my corporate bonus and my savings. I bought the house at auction for $300,000 cash. I paid off the tax liens. I paid off the outstanding utility bills, and I allowed the previous owners to remain in the residence as tenants." "Tenants," Judge Thorne repeated. "Tenants at will, Your Honor. They pay 0 rent. They pay 0 property taxes. They pay 0 maintenance. The only condition was that they never asked who the owner was. The management company told them it was an anonymous investor who wanted to hold the property for future development." I paused, letting the information sink in. The courtroom was dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the ragged breathing of my father. "They believed it because they wanted to believe it," I said. "They believed they were lucky. They believed God had provided a miracle. But it wasn't a miracle. It was me." I stood up and walked to the edge of the witness box, holding the deed up for the court to see. "I am Bluebird LLC, Your Honor. I am the sole proprietor. I am the investor. I am the landlord." The reaction was visceral. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The court reporter stopped typing for a split second, her jaw dropping. The CPS attorney looked from me to my parents, her eyes wide. But it was my parents' reaction that I savored. Arthur looked like he had been shot. He stared at me with a look of absolute betrayal, as if my saving them from homelessness was the crime and not his lies. He realized in that moment that the son he had dismissed, the son he had called selfish, the son he had tried to sacrifice to save his other son, had been the only thing standing between him and the street for 2 years. Martha let out a wail. It was a high, thin sound of pure despair. She covered her face with her hands, rocking back and forth. "No," she moaned. "No, no, no." She knew what this meant. She knew the power dynamic had just shifted so violently that the earth beneath her feet had cracked open. Judge Thorne leaned forward, her face stern. "Mr. Williams, Are you stating for the record that you own the residence at 452 Maple Street? Yes, Your Honor, I said, and I have the tax receipts to prove it. And these tenants, your parents, are they aware of this arrangement? They are now, I said. Then Mr. Williams lied under oath, the judge said, her voice turning to ice. He claimed to own the home. He claimed to have financial stability. He has neither, I said. He lives on Social Security checks that barely cover their food because Derek steals half of it every month. If you give them these children, Your Honor, you are sending them to a home that is not theirs, funded by a son they have disowned emotionally, and overseen by a man who cannot say no to his son. I walked back to the defense table and picked up one last piece of paper. It was a single sheet, crisp and white. And there is one more thing, Your Honor. I turned to face my parents. I looked at the hat my mother wore to church to pray for a son who gambled away her security. I looked at the suit my father wore to lie to a judge last night. These two people came to my hotel room, I said, my voice ringing clear in the silence. They tried to coerce me into committing perjury to save Derek from prison. They told me my career didn't matter. They told me I was disposable. They threatened me. I handed the paper to the bailiff to give to the judge. This is a notice to quit, Your Honor. It is an eviction notice. Martha screamed. It was a raw, guttural sound. You can't do this to us. We are your parents. I ignored her. I looked only at the judge. Per the terms of the tenancy agreement, any harassment or illegal activity by the tenant voids the lease immediately. Witness tampering is illegal. Harassment is illegal. I took a deep breath. I am evicting them, Your Honor. As of today, they are homeless. They have no address. They have no assets. And therefore, they cannot take custody of these children. Chaos erupted. Arthur stood up, knocking his chair over. You ungrateful witch, he shouted, lunging toward the railing. After everything we did for you, I fed you. I clothed you. You owe me. That house is mine. I built this family. Bailiff, Judge Thorne shouted, banging her gavel furiously. Order. Order in this court. Two deputies rushed forward, grabbing Arthur by the arms as he tried to climb over the partition. He was foaming at the mouth, screaming obscenities that no deacon should ever know, let alone shout in a court of law. You stole it, he roared as they dragged him back. You stole my dignity. You gave it away, Dad. I shouted back, my voice finally breaking the calm facade. You gave it away when you chose a criminal over your own integrity. You gave it away when you asked me to lie. I didn't steal anything. I bought the wreckage you left behind. Martha collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. My babies, she wailed. My grandbabies. Where will they go? Judge Thorne stood up, her black robes billowing like the wings of an avenging angel. Remove Mr. Williams from this courtroom immediately, she ordered. And Mrs. Williams, if you do not compose yourself, you will join him in a holding cell. The deputies hauled Arthur out the double doors, his shouts fading into the hallway. Martha was helped into her chair by a sympathetic but firm female deputy. She sat there weeping, broken, a queen whose kingdom had been revealed to be made of cardboard. I stood there alone in the center of the storm I had summoned. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands were steady. Judge Thorne looked at me. There was a new respect in her eyes, mixed with a profound sadness. Mr. Williams, she said quietly, the court acknowledges your ownership of the property, and the court acknowledges the perjury committed by the petitioner. She looked at the empty chair where Arthur had been. Petition for kinship guardianship is denied with prejudice. The grandparents are deemed unfit due to lack of stable housing, financial insolvency, and attempted fraud upon the court. She looked at the CPS attorney. The children will remain in the custody of the state until a suitable placement can be found. No, Martha wailed. My grandbabies? Please. You should have thought about your grandbabies before you tried to destroy your son, Judge Thorne said, closing the file. This hearing is adjourned. The sound of the gavel striking the sound block was not a sharp crack, but a heavy, final thud that seemed to seal the coffin on my brother's life. We were back in the criminal division courtroom 3 days later for the sentencing hearing. The plea deal had been rejected. The evidence was too overwhelming, and the public outcry too loud for the district attorney to offer leniency. Derek stood before the judge, his orange jumpsuit hanging loosely on his frame, his hands trembling behind his back. The judge looked down at him with zero sympathy. Derek Williams, you have been found guilty of 3 counts of child abandonment in the 2nd degree and 1 count of reckless endangerment. You displayed a callous disregard for the safety of your own children, prioritizing a vacation over their well-being. You fled the state while a storm endangered their lives. Derek hung his head. He looked broken. He looked like a man who had woken up from a dream where he was the king, only to find himself a pauper in chains. I sentence you to 12 months in the county correctional facility, followed by 3 years of probation, the judge declared. Furthermore, you are hereby branded a felon. This conviction will remain on your permanent record. You are ordered to complete 500 hours of community service and attend mandatory parenting classes before you can even petition for supervised visitation. Felony. The word hung in the air like toxic smoke. In the corporate world, in the world Derek pretended to belong to, a felony was a death sentence. He would never get a white-collar job again. He would never work in sales. He would never work in finance. He was unhireable. The golden boy who had always believed the world owed him a living was now officially a liability. Chloe stood next to him. Her sentence was lighter due to her cooperation in the final hours, but she still received 6 months of house arrest and probation. But Chloe wasn't looking at the judge. She was looking at Derek with eyes full of cold calculation. As the bailiff moved to take Derek away, Chloe spoke up, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the courtroom. "Wait," she said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a folded envelope. Derek turned to her, hope flickering in his eyes. "Babe," he whispered, "call my mom. Tell her to fix this." "I am not calling anyone, Derek," Chloe said, her voice devoid of emotion. "And I am not waiting for you." She tossed the envelope onto the defense table. It slid across the wood and stopped right in front of his handcuffed hands. "What is this?" Derek asked. "Divorce papers," Chloe said. "My lawyer filed them this morning. I am not staying married to a felon, Derek. I am not going to be the wife of a man who cannot provide. I am taking what is left of the assets and I am moving back to my parents' house in Savannah. Do not call me. Do not write me. We are done." Derek stared at the envelope. He looked like he had been slapped. "Chloe, please. You cannot leave me here. I did this for us. I did this for our anniversary. You did this because you are a loser," Chloe spat. "And I am done carrying you." She turned on her heel and walked out of the courtroom, her head held high, the ultimate survivor leaving the sinking ship without a backward glance. Derek let out a sob, a raw, ugly sound that echoed off the walls as the bailiffs dragged him through the side door toward the holding cells. He was alone. His wife was gone. His children were gone. His future was gone. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I felt a strange sense of holiness. It wasn't joy. It was just the feeling of an equation finally balancing out. The risk had been assessed, the loss had been mitigated, and the file was closed. I walked out of the courtroom into the bright, harsh light of the atrium. I needed fresh air. I needed to get away from the smell of government buildings and ruined lives. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking on the marble floor, a steady rhythm of departure. "Julian!" The voice was shrill and desperate. I didn't stop. I knew who it was. I pushed through the glass doors and walked out into the parking lot. The Georgia sun beating down on the asphalt, creating waves of heat that distorted the air. "Julian, wait, please." I heard the frantic scuffling of footsteps behind me. I stopped at my car, a sleek silver Mercedes sedan that I had bought with my bonus last year. I unlocked the door, but before I could get in, a hand grabbed my arm. It was my mother, Martha. She was out of breath, her face streaked with tears and sweat. My father, Arthur, was right behind her, panting, clutching his chest. They looked like refugees from a disaster zone. Their clothes were rumpled, their eyes wild with panic. They had been evicted that morning. The sheriff had come at 8 a.m. and given them 15 minutes to gather their essentials before locking the doors of 452 Maple Street. "Julian, please," Martha gasped, falling to her knees right there on the hot pavement. She grabbed the hem of my skirt, her fingers digging into the fabric. "You cannot leave us. You cannot do this." I looked down at her. This was the woman who had told me my career was meaningless. This was the woman who had demanded I sacrifice my future for her son. Now she was kneeling in a parking lot, ruining her stockings, begging for the very thing she had tried to destroy. "Get up, mother," I said, my voice cold. "You are making a scene." "I do not care about a scene," she wailed. "We have nowhere to go, Julian. The sheriff locked us out. They changed the locks. All our things are inside. We have no money. We have no family. You are our son. You have to help us." Arthur stepped forward, his hands shaking. "Julian, look at us. We are old people. We cannot live on the street. We cannot go to a shelter. We are respectable people." "Respectable?" I laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Respectable people do not cover up crimes, Dad. Respectable people do not try to frame their son. Respectable people do not steal from their children to feed a gambling addiction." "I made a mistake," Arthur pleaded, tears leaking from his eyes. "I was desperate. I was trying to save the family. I thought I was doing the right thing. Please, Julian, just let us back in the house. We will sign anything. We will do anything. Just give us a place to sleep." I looked at them. I looked at the parents who had raised me. I remembered the years of neglect, the years of being second best, the years of being the safety net they never acknowledged. I remembered the phone call in the hotel room. "So what if you lose your job, Julian? It is just a job." They had been willing to burn my life to the ground to keep Derek warm. And now that Derek was in ashes, they wanted to come into my house and warm themselves by my fire. "No," I said. Martha looked up at me, her face a mask of shock. "What?" "No," I repeated. "I am not letting you back in. I am not giving you money. I am not saving you. But we are your parents," she screamed, clutching my skirt tighter. "We gave you life. You owe us." I reached down and peeled her fingers off my skirt one by one. Her grip was weak. "I owe you nothing," I said. "You spent my inheritance on Derek. You spent my love on Derek. You spent my loyalty on Derek. You made your investment. Now you have to live with the returns." "Julian," Arthur sobbed, using the childhood nickname he hadn't used in 20 years. "Please don't be cruel. We have nobody else. Where will we go?" I opened my car door. I looked at them one last time, etching this image into my mind. My parents kneeling in the dirt, stripped of their pride, stripped of their lies, stripped of their power. "You were ready to sacrifice me to save Derek," I said, my voice low and hard. "You told me my life didn't matter. You told me I was disposable. Well, you made your choice. You chose him." I pointed toward the courthouse jail. "So go live with Derek. Go ask him for help. Oh wait, I forgot. He is going to prison. And he has nothing to give you because he never did." Martha let out a sound of pure anguish, a wail that tore through the parking lot. She collapsed onto the asphalt, sobbing into her hands. Arthur just stood there, swaying slightly, as if the wind had been knocked out of him. I got into my car. I closed the door, shutting out the heat and the noise. I started the engine. The air conditioning blasted cool air against my face, drying the sweat on my forehead. I put the car in reverse. I looked in the rearview mirror as I pulled away. They were still there, two small figures alone in the middle of a vast, empty parking lot. They looked like ghosts, ghosts of a past I had finally exorcised. I drove out of the lot and merged onto the highway, heading toward my penthouse, toward my career, toward my life. I didn't turn on the radio. I drove in silence, letting the hum of the engine be the only sound. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I wiped it away impatiently. It wasn't a tear of regret. It was a tear of relief. It was the final drop of poison leaving my system. I had lost my family, but I had found myself. And as I watched the Atlanta skyline rise up before me, shining and strong, I knew that I would never be anyone's doormat again. I was Julian Williams. I was the owner of Bluebird LLC, and I was finally free. 3 months have passed since the gavel fell and severed the rotting limb that was my family tree. The silence in my life since that day has not been empty. It has been full of peace, full of productivity, full of the kind of clean, organized quiet that I had craved since I was a child, hiding in my room to escape my mother's criticism. I sat in the conference room of David's law firm, reviewing the final documents for the guardianship of Ethan, Lily, and Mia. The state had done its job. They had found a kinship placement that did not involve my parents. Her name was Beatrice. She was a distant cousin on my father's side, a woman who had been ostracized by the family years ago because she refused to lend Arthur money for a business scheme that inevitably failed. She lived in a small, weathered house in Savannah. She was a school librarian. She had no money, but she had a surplus of integrity. She had stepped forward the moment she heard about the arrest, offering her home. Not because she wanted the kids' trust fund, there wasn't one, or because she wanted glory, but because she simply could not bear the thought of them in the system. I looked at the photos the social worker had sent. Ethan was smiling, a real smile, not the anxious, people-pleasing grimace he used to wear around Derek. Lily and Mia were playing in a garden that looked wild and overgrown and magical. They looked safe. "Is everything in order?" David asked, sitting across from me. I picked up my pen. The documents in front of me were not for public record. They were the charter for the violently anonymous trust one was establishing. "The Skyward Trust," I read aloud. "The beneficiaries are Ethan, Lily, and Mia Williams. The trustee is your firm." "Correct," David said. "The terms are exactly as you specified. Full tuition for private schools in Savannah. A monthly stipend for Beatrice that covers all food, clothing, and housing costs, plus a salary for her caretaking. Medical and dental insurance fully paid. And a college fund for each child that vests when they turn 25, provided they attend financial literacy counseling. And the anonymity clause I asked for? Ironclad, David assured me. Beatrice knows there is a benefactor, but she does not know it is you. The checks come from the trust. All communication goes through my office. As far as she knows, the money is a state grant or a charitable donation. Derek and your parents will never know. They cannot guilt you. They cannot use the kids as leverage to get to your wallet." I nodded and signed the papers. The ink flowed smoothly onto the page. It was the most expensive signature of my life, costing me a significant percentage of my yearly bonus and investment dividends, but it was also the most valuable. I was buying their freedom and I was buying my own. I could not raise them. I knew that about myself. I was a career man. I traveled. I valued my solitude. If I had taken them in, I would have resented the disruption, and they would have felt it. They would have grown up knowing they were a burden, just like I had. I would not do that to them. Beatrice would give them the time and the softness I couldn't. I would give them the resources and the security Derek never would. It was a partnership, a silent, invisible partnership. "Make sure Beatrice gets the first check by Friday," I said, handing the folder back to David. "Ethan needs braces, and Lily wants to take violin lessons. Make it happen." "Consider it done," David said. "You are a good uncle, Julian." I stood up, smoothing my blazer. "I am a good risk analyst, David. I identified a liability and I turned it into an asset. These kids are the future. I am just hedging my bets." David smiled. He knew me well enough to know that was my way of saying I loved them. I left his office and drove my Mercedes through the bustling streets of Atlanta. The city looked different to me now, brighter, sharper. For years, I had driven these streets with a low-level hum of anxiety in the back of my mind. The dread of the next phone call, the fear of the next crisis, the weight of my family's expectations dragging behind me like a parachute. Now the parachute was cut. I was flying. I pulled into the private garage of my building. The biometric scanner read my retina, and the heavy gate slid open. I parked in my reserved spot. There were no oil stains from my brother's leaky car. There were no scratches on the wall from his careless driving. It was pristine. I took the elevator up to the penthouse. The doors opened directly into my foyer. Tuong Quan Vance was already there, standing on my balcony, looking out at the sunset. He was wearing a crisp linen shirt and holding 2 glasses of a deep red Cabernet. He turned when he heard me enter. "Report, soldier," he said, his voice gruff, but his eyes warm. "Mission accomplished," I said, dropping my keys in the bowl. "The trust is funded. The kids are secure. Beatrice has the resources she needs." The colonel nodded approvingly. He walked over and handed me a glass of wine. "Good work," he said. "You secured the perimeter. You protected the innocent. That is all anyone can ask." I took the glass and walked with him back out to the balcony. The air was cool for Atlanta, a gentle breeze blowing in from the mountains. We stood in silence for a moment, watching the city turn from gold to twilight blue. Tuong Quan Vance had become a fixture in my life over the last 3 months. After the trial, he had reached out not to ask for anything but to check on me. We had started meeting for coffee, then dinner. I discovered that beneath his military exterior was a man who had lost his own daughter to addiction years ago. He had tried to save her and failed. Helping me save Ethan and Mia was his redemption. He was the father I should have had. He didn't ask me for money. He didn't criticize my career. He respected my strength. He told me when I was wrong and praised me when I was right. He was honorable. "Have you heard from them?" he asked quietly. I took a sip of wine. The liquid was rich and complex, grounding me. "Arthur sent a letter to David's office," I said. "He is living in a studio apartment in East Point. Martha is staying with her sister in Alabama. They are separated. He wanted me to know he is looking for work, and he asked if I could spare $500 for a suit for interviews." The colonel snorted, shaking his head. "Some people never change. They just change tactics." I told David to send him a list of local charities that provide clothing for job seekers, I said. "I didn't send the money." "Good," the colonel said. "You cannot water a dead plant and expect it to grow. You just make mud." We leaned against the railing below us. The traffic on Peachtree Street was a river of light. "Derek is in processing," I said. "He starts his sentence next week." Chloe moved back to Savannah with her parents. She is filing for full custody once he is inside, but with her record, she won't get it. The state prefers Beatrice, so the threats are neutralized. "The board is clear," the colonel said. "Yes," I said. "The board is clear." I looked at him. "You know, Colonel, people say blood is thicker than water. They use it to guilt you into staying in toxic situations." The colonel swirled his wine. "The actual quote is, 'The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb,'" he said. "It means the bonds you choose, the promises you make, are stronger than the biology you are born into." I smiled. "That is exactly what I mean. You are my family now, Colonel. You and Beatrice and the kids and David. You are the people who respect me. You are the people who show up." The colonel clinked his glass against mine. "To family," he said. "The one we build." "To family," I echoed. My phone buzzed on the table beside us. It was a harsh, jarring sound in the peaceful evening. I glanced at the screen. It was a notification from my blocked messages folder. My phone automatically filtered them but let me know they existed. "Senator Derek, please answer. I am scared. They are transferring me to the state facility. I need money for commissary. Mom said you have millions. Don't do this to me. I am your big brother. Remember when we used to play in the yard? You owe me. Just answer." I stared at the words. A year ago, that text would have ruined my night. I would have felt the old, familiar claw of guilt in my gut. I would have remembered the little boy who used to share his candy with me before he learned he could just take mine. I would have wondered if I was being too hard. I would have opened my wallet just to make the pain stop. But tonight, I felt nothing. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel the urge to reply. It was like reading a text from a stranger who had the wrong number. Derek was a ghost. He was a character in a story I had finished reading. His fear was real, I was sure. But it was his fear. He had bought it, paid for it, and now he owned it. It was not my inventory. I looked at the Colonel, who was watching me with a protective gaze, ready to step in if I wavered. "Is everything okay?" he asked. I picked up the phone. "It is just spam," I said. I didn't delete the message. I didn't need to. It was already in the trash where it belonged. I held the power button down. The screen went black. The little white Apple logo faded away. The buzzing stopped. The connection was severed. I set the phone back on the table, face down. I looked out at the city. The lights were dazzling, millions of lives playing out in the grid below. Somewhere down there, my parents were learning to live within their means. Somewhere down there, my brother was learning to live within a cell. And up here, in the cool, clean air, I was learning to live for myself. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of jasmine from my balcony garden and the oaky aroma of the wine. "I am more than okay, Colonel," I said, smiling as I turned my back on the city, and the phone and the past. "I am finally free." We stood there as the stars came out. Two soldiers who had survived the war, sipping wine in the quiet victory of the aftermath. The night was silent, and it was beautiful. The most profound lesson I learned is that blood does not automatically equal family. For years, I sacrificed my dignity to buy the love of people who viewed me only as a resource. I realized that true family is not defined by biology, but by respect, integrity, and who stands beside you when the storm breaks. Setting boundaries with toxic relatives isn't an act of cruelty. It is a necessary act of survival. I had to lose the family I was born into to find the peace I deserved, proving that sometimes your chosen family is the strongest bond of all. Thanks for watching. Take care, good luck. And remember, never let your kindness be mistaken for weakness. If you have ever faced something similar with your own family, share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.